I mean, these things were invented. Those of you who are of a certain age and girth may well recall the mid-'70s when home microwave ovens first came out, and they started to be marketed for home use. And they call these things microwave ovens, and they told you that basically you could do the things an oven would do, but faster and more scientifically, while perhaps irradiating your entire family. And they did that, I think, basically because everyone had an oven and knew what an oven was. They did not do it because the thing that they were selling was an oven. It was, in fact, nothing at all like an oven. It was a steamer, if it was like anything else that anybody had ever used in a kitchen. Microwave ovens are dynamite steamers, but they're crummy ovens. And yet, the entire mindset, the culture of microwaving, which there was one of for a while. There were books, there were classes, there were continuing education things. People would go to their local junior high and learn how to use their new microwave and things like that. It was all focused on ovening stuff, right? Because the notion was you're going to replace or augment your existing oven with this new oven. And no one in America owned a steamer. So there was no market for replacing your existing steamer. And no one ever wants to create a new paradigm and try to sell it. Right? So they called them ovens. And the result of that was that, I don't know if you've ever tried to do anything like make bacon, bake a cake, or roast a turkey in a microwave oven. But the result of that was that they created paraphernalia that you could buy so that the bacon wasn't limp and wet when it came out. So that the cakes weren't this weird, foul, soggy, omelet-like thing. And so that the turkey didn't look like it was asking you for its feathers back when it came out. So my notion is that we are at the bacon, cakes, and turkey point in the development of web-based instruction. That web-based instruction is being sold to us as this new technological thing that sort of replaces something we've been doing all along, but better. But that the reality is, it does it far worse. And that all of these gizmos that they're trying to sell us are really things to try to paper over that truth, while there are these things that it does that are marvelous and empowering and enabling that are different from what we've been doing before. And no one's selling us any gizmos to do that with it. And therefore, I walk it. So that's the sort of starting, that's where I start in terms of trying to articulate my concerns. What I'm really going to do is I'm going to lay out a bunch of things that I think are fallacies. The bacon, cakes, and turkey stuff. Or maybe it should be called turkeys. I'm not sure. Anyway, the bacon, cakes, and turkey part of the phenomenon. Things that I hear and read and have inflicted upon me, and that I just think are wrong. And then I'll try and delineate a bunch of the things that seem to me to sort of frame the question around, frame the questions around what we can do with this stuff that's really good, that's empowering, that's new, that's useful. So, and I think of the fallacies that come up as being threefold. One is the stuff that comes up for administrators, the second is the stuff that comes up for students, and the third is the stuff that comes up for us as teachers. The administrative fallacies are the ones that I find most terrifying. They've got me running terribly scared. Because basically, it seems to me that otherwise intelligent people start drooling when you mention distance learning or web-based instruction or things like that. Otherwise intelligent, I should say administrators, to make a fine point here. Having been one most of my life, we have seen the enemy and they are us. And they start drooling and they start thinking that this is going to transform the bottom line of their enterprise. And these are friends, people I work with, people who assign my course load. And they look at this stuff and they think, and as near as I can tell, they don't actually articulate, but there are only two possible premises that they could be working from. One of which is there are vast, untapped hordes of potential students out there whom we will be able to reach because they all own computers but don't own cars. Or don't have time. They're working. They work really, really hard, 2-3 jobs a day, so they can't even get to part-time programs. But they all had high-speed internet links at home. Right? That's the sort of notion that these folks implicitly seem to have in their heads. And my impression is that the market for education in the United States, market for higher education in the United States is largely saturated at this point. So that in fact, the reality is that it's much more like a water balloon. The only way we're going to get more students from web-based instruction is by taking them away from somebody else who's currently educating them. Which is more of the same. It's not, we may be able to do it. Those of us who do this well may in fact be able to lure people away, but that's a redistributive phenomenon. It's not going to add to the pool. So I think that's one of the fallacies of administration. The second one I think is that this stuff is cheaper. Now it's got to be cheaper, right? It's done by a computer. It's done, 80% of our operating costs are personnel costs. 20% are thing costs. What if we couldn't, instead of having this course taught by a person, we could have it taught by a thing? Then it would only cost us 1/5 as much. That seems to be the implicit premise of this thing. Or we only have to get the person to teach it once, and then after that, the thing can do it. Because it'll pick it up pretty quickly, the teacher's part. Or, well, we don't have to tell the students that it's really a graduate student at the other end of the coax if they can't see them. Pay no attention to the teacher behind the curtain. So it's one of those premises, because it is counterintuitive, because when you think about it, intrinsically, doing course delivery on the web is, generally speaking, more labor intensive than the parallel versions in real life. Right? And you can have that conversation with administrators and walk away, and it will turn out that just like, I don't know if you know the nature of plexiglass, but one of the things is you can heat it up and bend it, and if you reheat it, it will remember its original shape and snap back to that. And based on that phenomenon, I have concluded that all administrators are made of plexiglass. Because you can have these conversations, and they understand, and there's real good dynamic going on. You walk out of the room, and somebody reheats them, and they're back to where they were before. So, when one thinks about it, basically, you only do two things, realistically, in instruction generally. One is you impart information, and the other is somehow you interact. Now, there was a form that involved imparting information without interaction before this stuff came along. It was called books. And books are, in fact, cheaper to generate because they are a linear development path than web-based instruction is, because it's a lateral development path and takes you a lot longer to do the software generation end of it in your head. Books are, in fact, more costly to produce, so if you're a publisher, you might save money. But if the people cost that you're concerned about is the teaching cost, is the instructor cost, excuse me, then it's going to cost more than a book. Developing the same material set on the web is going to cost more than developing it in a book. Similarly, when you are actually interacting with students over the web, those of you who've done it can prove me wrong if you figured out a way to do this, but it takes me longer because I'm interacting with them one at a time, but I'm interacting with you all at once. Or, we're doing this together. To interact asynchronously is better for the students, but it's more time-consuming for the teacher. It's more convenient, because I can do it in my pajamas at home in the middle of the night, which is when I would prefer to be doing it. But my wife doesn't want the students in. So, we do the classes at school during the day, and I dress for it. But these are more labor-intensive activities. And so, the course production stuff is harder than starting up a new course live for the first time or writing a book, if what you're doing is straight imparting of information. And the interaction with students is harder, is more costly. in my view, this is sort of a good example of this sort of gee whiz phenomenon, that because it's mechanical, it must be better or faster or easier or cheaper or newer or something. Anyway, when you start thinking about what's in this for students, the stuff that's usually talked about is the anywhere, anytime phenomenon. Right? They can get educated anywhere, anytime. And this is put forward as though it's a major innovation, as though no one had ever heard of homework, which is one of the original anywhere, anytime educational motifs, right? Settings. But never mind homework. There's also, for, again, imparting of information, the anywhere, anytime, genuinely anywhere item, the book. Right? There's anywhere, anytime instruction. Or the anywhere, anytime instruction form of correspondence schools. Right? So it's not that this is brand new that way either. You might add a certain amount of more interactivity, you might add access to multimedia, but basically this stuff is pretty much doing the same thing in that arena that we've tried to do before, other ways. So the question becomes not, is this new? It becomes, how is this better? What about this is better? Now, I have to think a lot of things about this are better. But I think if we don't start from that question, if we don't start from the question, what does this do better than a book? Rather than, how can I do this that way? Which seems to be the way a lot of what we do goes, right? I mean, I think to myself, how can I possibly put this on the web? And instead of thinking that way, why don't we think about, why would I want to put this on the web? I think that's a more fruitful starting point. So that brings me to the question of, what do we think about this stuff? Where are the fallacies in the teaching end of this thing? And that's a little more complicated, I think. But the one core fallacy, or one core question I have occurred to me in sort of a blinding flash, as I suddenly realized that the way I've been designing my classes on the web, I've taught now 3 courses, 2 courses, 3 classes, that I use a web component as a major sort of side benefit or harm. And then I've taught 1 course entirely on the web to non-law students. And in the middle of doing all that and developing the 3 of these 4 things that I've done, it suddenly occurred to me that what I was doing, which was, I thought, intensely cool. I mean, I just thought this stuff was so spiffy, and I was so proud of so much of what I was doing. And then I thought to myself, gosh, this is so terrific, because my students doing this will come to realize, like me, that it makes sense to spend a lot of your time sitting in front of a computer screen, sort of surfing the web to get answers to questions that you have, and learning stuff from the internet. And as I sort of heard myself saying that, I saw myself doing stuff, looking for information, learning things on the internet, and realized that what I was designing bore no resemblance whatsoever to the way I learned when I was using the web. So I think that the core fallacy for us as teachers, on one level, is that I'm not sure that we think about how we learn before we think about how to shape the ways in which we're going to teach in this medium. And to make that more concrete, let me say that what I do when I try to learn stuff from the web is mostly what I do is lurk. You know, I nose around, I look at places, and if there are interactive things going on, I lurk. I sit there and I read people's conversations. When I design a course and a student lurks, I view that as a failure on my part, and the student has to be somehow forced into interaction at the website. Which is, of course, just parallel to how I feel in the classroom. You know, it's a personal affront when people don't speak in class, so you got to goad them into it. But I realized suddenly that though in human contact, in live contact, I'm pretty garrulous, on the web, I'm a heavy-duty lurker, which I found fascinating. The second thing I do is I search. Right? I go looking for the things I want. I do not ask somebody to deliver them to me, and then I'll go through their steps. But when I build this stuff, I build steps for people to go through. Sometimes I'll ask questions. But usually, the courses that I've been teaching, mostly what I ask my students to do is give answers. So the thing that I'm doing, the teaching thing that I'm doing, is totally different from, divorced from, and not drawing on the same attributes of the internet that I'm using when I learn on the internet, and when I'm getting the parts of the internet that I think are so incredibly useful to me as a user of the internet. I'm not doing those things. I'm not replicating them. I'm not packing them into my courses, which I think is something I should be thinking about, don't you? I mean, in terms of why I'm doing this stuff. So I think that leads me to ask some questions, right? So these are my sort of paranoid questions, which is, what are we trying to do? Why are we doing this? Before I set mouse to pad, I should figure out what it is I want to accomplish with this thing. So I have something to assess it against, right? Benchmark of some sort. Not simply, as it was the first time I did this, acquire the skill of being able to do the web design, which is why I did it the first time. I want to be able to do it. So the next question that I think you want to ask, I want to ask when I'm doing that is, why would I want to do that? If that's what I want to accomplish, it's certainly a good question to ask, why try? Why do that thing? Who would want that? Anyone to be doing that thing for them, to them, at them? You know? Why do that? And then only then you get to the question of, what does web-based instruction offer that would allow me to do that thing which I've now decided is worth doing better than other modalities? And when you get an answer to that third question, you can begin to ask the kinds of questions that, it seems to me, most of the stuff in the literature at least starts from. Questions like, what's the best authoring tool for writing a web-based course? Well, you can't, there isn't one. In fact, there aren't any good ones, but if you were trying to figure out which is the least worst one, you could fruitfully do that only by knowing what it was you were trying to accomplish. And we don't usually do that. For instance, there are some very good tools for helping people who do not believe that they could ever possibly learn how to do a web-based course. Do a web-based course within 2 hours. You know, there's a couple good products out there. Virtual Classroom's not bad at that. Blackboard's not bad at that. You can get somebody into a forum-based, discussion-driven virtual classroom class who had never touched the internet before, I would say in about 2 hours. They'd have their course up and ready, and the discussion forum ready for student input. And then once they saw that that had happened, they might be open to the concept that they could now begin to design a course of their own, starting from other premises. And I've done that with some folks. That's to say, 4 of us from my university who were the sort of blindsided recipients of a grant that had been solicited by other people. That from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, whose mandate is basically, in my view, to try and eliminate all human beings in universities as quickly as possible. And so we were part of that effort. So the 4 of us started designing courses from scratch, effectively in Virtual Classroom. I was using Virtual Classroom and they were using Web Course in a Box. And it was a tremendously wonderful experience. And one of us, who was from the social work school, developed a course that the computer end of it, the technological end of it, she spent all of about 2 hours, I think, getting the course up. All of the development time had to do with, it was a course on social work supervision. The development time was the same thing you'd develop if you were going to develop something like a correspondence course version of that or something. Some way, thinking about exercises and ways to relate to people where you weren't physically present with them and were dealing with them asynchronously, that could convey that material, get people to talk about things like that. And there it was. It took her 2 hours, and now she's a big convert. And she's up for doing the next thing in a much more feature-rich milieu. But you can't ask the question of which should go next until, again, you ask, well, what's her next course going to be about? Because Web Course in a Box was just fine for what she did. It was just fine. It worked perfectly adequately. So all of this stuff, I think, drives back to that question of what for, why, how come, what do we want to do, what do we want to accomplish, what things, why are we doing this asynchronously, why are we doing this on the internet, and what internet tools do we think are going to, where's the value added, where's the value lost. So that takes me to a series of sort of lists, basically. Things that I think, and I'm going to focus mostly on what I think is better. I mean, there's some things that are worse. You lose, for instance, the capacity to browse through hard copy. Now, I'm not sure why that's a bad thing to lose, to be honest. I've been trying to figure that one out for years as I think about it. But I feel that I'm losing something, and so I've chalked that up for most of this time to being old. But ever since I started doing the web-based instruction, the phenomenon I've noticed is that my young students print everything out. Right? So it's not just Edge. It's not because these are the kids who actually grew up with a mouse in their hand. Right? So there's something else. You are in fact losing something, and people's thoughts about what it is that's lost would be very interesting. And of course, you lose the warmth of the medium, the socialization, the possibility to acculturate people to a profession, those kinds of things. You lose the immediacy of that on some level, and you lose, in some ways, the capacity to evaluate anything other than than paper and pencil test evaluatable type skill. But the main things that interest me are, what does it do better? And I've got a sort of random list of things that I think this does much better, or it's at least arguably better. So that's the first list. And the things that I've got on my list, and I invite you to add to the list, the things that I've got on my list are, first and foremost, hypertext. The fact that you can do these lateral links between text, from thing to thing. And an example of that is, let me see, I'll give you examples as I had some up, is Larry Wilkins's thing from about Paul's graph, if I can find it. There it is. And what he's got is the case with hypertext links to all sorts of stuff. Things like, if you click on the judge, you'll find stuff about the judge. And then you go back, or you have to close it.
Yeah, you have to close it.
Yeah. Close it. And so the case is enriched by all sorts of stuff, right? This is, economic analysis, biography, history, all the things that you want to do as asides in a classroom, but you really don't have time for, and that for some students are the transformational moment where this makes them get the case. They can be pulled by the student themselves, each student themselves. And that's really pretty cool. And it's not just pretty cool, it's extraordinary what it can do if you put the time into making all of those links in the document. I do a thing which I didn't actually go to a particular one, but this is the course that I'm teaching this summer. And I've got all the cases that are on Westlaw that the students read in the course. It's a family law course. So I've got all the cases up here with the Westlaw hot links that automatically come in whenever you cite something. So let's see if we can find another hot link that's not in this case. There we go. So the students can do sort of sideways research, and then if they, I'm getting close out of it. They can do the sideways research and browse around. And now you get a type of browsing that you never had the opportunity to do in hard copy research, that you can do through the materials richly, that just makes, to my taste, all the difference in the world. So that's a That's a real positive kind of thing. Another thing that's, I think, less obvious is one of the things, but that occurred to me one time when I was watching actually other kids. My own kid was standing transfixed at a video game, like this, and he was hunched over killing things, and blood was coming out literally off of the screen. And next to him, and we were in a video arcade not too far from where I teach, and next to him was a kid who, you'll pardon my prejudices, but for all the world appeared to me, for one thing, my kid was like 4 or 5 years old at this time, 4 or 5 years old, and this other kid was 13 or 14, and it was school hours, and it was a school day, and there was this other kid standing there playing this video game. And he was unbelievable. He was just unbelievably good. And it was clear he was unbelievably good, because when he got to the end, he added his name to that list of things, and the other names around him were his own. So, and it started, it appeared to me that this kid was not an academic achiever. But it also appeared to me that this kid had learned a difficult mythos with eye-hand coordination associated with it, complexly, at great depth, from a machine that was giving him feedback of a sort that in ed school they told me not to tell people. Right? What the machine was saying to him every time he played was eventually, "You die, give me some more money." Which in ed school they tell you not to tell your students. Right? That's just not the kind of feedback you're supposed to give people. "You die, give me some more money, I'll tell you some more stuff. I'll give you another chance." It's sort of the way we run law school. But in ed school, for K-12, you're not supposed to tell that to students. So the question is, what was it that the machine had that I didn't, that allowed this kid to keep cranking money into it? Now, he didn't start out like this. He wasn't born with that capacity. It was a learned capacity. And it was a learned capacity that he did despite the fact that the machine was saying to him routinely at the beginning, "You die, and you die quickly at the outset. Throw another quarter in." I think what it's got is two things that are very important things. It's got privacy. People around you don't actually see somebody telling you publicly, "You die, give me more money." And it's got, on some level, value neutrality. Not because the message, "You die, give me more money," is value neutral, but because no one believes a machine has moral authority. Right? So those two things are present for us as well on the web. The notion that the learning that takes place in private places, which is empowering. And the notion that, in addition to that, lost it. The notion that in addition to being private, the kind of learning that it is not judging. It doesn't judge you when it tells you that you're wrong. Or at least students don't seem to experience it that way. Another thing that this does well is provide the capacity to do peer critiques. So, if I find the right one, that wasn't it, this one. This was a course that I did, never mind. This was a course that I did in the fall semester, and say, this thing, there it is, Law, Power, and Morality. This is a dialogue, and students are talking to each other about what they're saying, much more than they do in the classroom. In the classroom, everybody faces the teacher, you know the stuff, and faces the teacher, and on the web, they don't. And the teacher often gets involved too frequently if the teacher is doing it for the first time. But if you stay out of it, the students start talking to each other, and there's peer reactions, and there's, in addition to that, peer critique as a possibility, which is really a terrific thing that I think is hard to get across in a regular classroom, even in a small class like this one, which is 20 people. There's a capacity for reflection. You can tell people, "I want you to think about something for this week and post it on the web for everyone to see and react to." And that generates an environment of reflection that's different from, "I want you to think about this for a week and turn me in a one-page reflection memo." different kind of thing, different kind of relation to the experience. Those of you who've used Usenet groups who participate, or listservs, have participated in listservs, are aware of the fact that the internet seems to be especially good at getting people to say feelings. It's not as great at deep analytic thought, at generating deep analytic thought, but it's really good at letting people say things that they might not be willing to say if the other living people were in the room. It is, in some ways, terrific for access purposes, data access purposes. If something is in digital form, you can access it and send it all over the place insanely well. So that, back to this thing, these documents were, you can just get all these cases anywhere, anytime, right? You can just pull them in and find them, and they're all there. Of course, if something is not in digital form, if it's analog still, you can spend the rest of your life scanning it into the machine and then trying to correct the mistakes your scanner made one at a time, or you can hire perhaps the entire law school as research assistants and have them read the stuff you've scanned into the machine. And then possibly, if you've got the entire law school working at it for a semester, you can get a course, the materials for a course, the analog materials for a course, properly set to go on the web. So it's very labor intensive for that, but stuff that's digitized is easily there. The other thing that's really terrific about this is that I wasn't expecting is that this summer, let's see what is this one. This summer, this course that we're doing on family law, which is a simulation-based course, 5 of us are teaching it together. And we're never crossing paths physically. We're never in the same space at the same time. But we're all teaching the entire course. And the thing that's making that possible is the fact that we can contact each other and our students asynchronously this way. And we can stay on top of what each of us is doing. And we have sort of shared resources that are our mutual starting points. So that if one goes not back there, but back here, for instance, these are 4 different roles of actors in the simulation, and each of them has 5 students representing them and 1 supervisor who's one of us, so that you can then go to what are the beginnings of a discussion forum, which is picking up from, this one happens to be using Web Course in a Box to generate it. And the students who will be starting in on this next week can go to a discussion forum about that course, about that role, and they'll talk to their teacher. And all 5 of us teaching it will be able to see that. So that's I think it's incredibly facilitated with collaboration. If one goes back to this thing, this one, and one goes back to if you noticed when this was up, it's still up somewhere. Let's go to the other way. In any case, if you noticed in that window where there was discussion going back and forth among students, there was one student who was driving the discussion. Tina was her name. And one of the things that the web does is it gives Tina enough airroom, which my classroom does not do. Now that becomes especially important when you recognize that Tina was the strongest person in that group. And what Tina had to say was extremely useful. But I couldn't give her as much time because there wasn't. She would have taken the full hour and more. There wasn't enough time for Tina there, but there was enough time. Tina eventually ran out of steam posting things. But to the extent she did that, she got a lot of my attention, and she also shared it with other people, which is an extraordinary thing that this can do for you. And the last thing that in this category, this list, is that one of the things it can do for you if you let it is it can make you ask those questions I started with, which is why are we doing this? Right? What's better about this than that? All of those questions are equally applicable, obviously, to your classrooms. But those of us who've been doing this for a while, and I have the dubious pleasure of having been teaching for 17 years at a school that's been open for 60. So, those of us who've been doing that for a long time, have sort of forgotten to ask those questions at the start of each semester. And by doing this, you refresh the need to ask the questions about the same issues, like lurking, the lurking issue. What is a classroom issue? It's a web issue. Because the web has raised the issue for me, now I'm rethinking my reactions to it in class. That's also a powerful value. It's an indirect value to the students, it's a direct value to me. Two other quick lists. One is just a list. It's the stuff that the things that I think you need or could use tools for in developing a class that that none of the packages has all of. Right? So which is why I think this is eventually going to get pushed in a modularized direction. These things that I've been developing are all. Let's look at the current one. This course. The discussion groups are all based on what Course in a Box Virtual Classroom, and the materials are largely based on Twent. So in one course, I'm using both Twent and Virtual Classroom and HTML, and for some purposes, in some courses, in this course, where I'm using it to schedule office hours, I'm also using a database manager. So students can schedule time with me and let me know that they've done so. And then it stays there. And the anywhere, anytime quality of this is really terrific for me because I'm forever forgetting who I'm meeting with when, but I'm always near a computer. So I can always find out what my office hour schedule is. And the sort of lost transactions between them and me have disappeared. So this is picking up just off a database manager. So what can you do? In addition to database, email modules, using email. Email is actually probably, I'm on the line of wondering whether email isn't a better way to do discussion than web-based forums, than threaded discussions. I think there are good arguments both ways. But forums is another thing. Threaded discussion groups, listservs, forums, things like that. Whiteboards, things that are synchronous, but on the web. Unmoderated, synchronous kinds of contexts like chat rooms. Search capacity. Very, very few development tools bring in the capacity to search documents that are not part of that thing, that were not originated within, say, Blackboard or whatever the tool is, whatever the environment is. But there are search engines out there, and search engines, the ability to Boolean search large amounts of data is itself transformational. There are test construction modules of different sorts. Hit counters. That's a little thing, but it seems extremely useful. If you go back to one of these, I put a hit counter in most everything that I do. And the average course is let's see. There we go. That course, that's the last spring's course. 1,137 hits in the course of the semester from 20 students and dealing with the website. Of course, of those 1,137 hits, about 1,104 were me. But it's still useful to have something like that keeps track of that. Passwording and password management modules are extremely useful things to have. They're not really well implemented in the stuff I've seen, in the course development tools that I've seen. HTML editors. None of the course development tools has a good HTML editor built in, but there are good HTML editors out there. JavaScript development tools, stuff that does registration management, that's the stuff that in some ways the courses in a box do the best at. Site and file management. I haven't seen anybody think through the question of this collaborative notion of what it takes, what kinds of tools would be useful to help teachers collaborate on a course. But I think there is a valuable tool to be built once one can think of what its contours would look like, of how to make it easier and better for teachers to teach a course simultaneously, asynchronously, using web-based tools. So that's really a list of kinds of tools that I wish I had and don't, basically. I don't feel I have tools for any of those things at a level that I find acceptable. And the last thing I sort of want to leave you with is a set of dichotomies, just tensions or pairs of things that it seems that we all have to think about. One is, and in no particular order, one is the difference between using, and I mentioned it before, the difference between using a website to augment or supplement a course and using one standalone. What are the differences in the teaching dynamics and the pedagogies between those two things? What's the difference? And I've not seen a lot of discussion about the difference between the pedagogical question of using the web to convey material versus using the web to foster conversation. Now, there are tools for both, and all the packages have both tools in them. But they're really very, very, very different kinds of enterprises. Putting a lot of material up so people can get at it, and even helping them find their way around it, is a very different enterprise from getting people to talk to each other on the internet. And we don't talk about what kinds of different things, what the consequences of those differences are. There's a dichotomy between building a course and building a life's work. One of the things that's been happening here is now this is the second time I've taught this course, and I had to redo a lot of stuff because in order to get it over, to get the things over, I realized that I had built the initial course in a course-centric fashion, rather than with the notion that the resources in that course might be reused at a later date in another course. So now I'm beginning to think I'm going to have to start thinking in terms of my life's work and sort of organizing my resources as reusable things in future incarnations of myself. Then I can will them to my children and things. There's a trade-off between reflection and interaction. Right? Between courses that are about getting people to think about what they're doing and courses that are about getting people to interact with each other. Or parts of courses. There's a huge tension between the linear quality of essentially all the web design tools. All the forum software is based on essentially a flat file database structure. But my classroom interactions, I think what I'm doing when I teach Socratically, is my classroom interactions are relational. They're not flat files. I'm taking what that student says and weaving it over to what this student says, and I'm bringing them together and yoking it to that, and taking last week's lecture and tying all these things together. And for me, it makes a pretty package. The students all glaze. But for me, I think I'm making connections. Right? That's what I think, in fact, my purpose in the room is. But I don't get that opportunity from the forum management software in any of the tools. I don't get the opportunity to do anything other than respond to one student in that point in the thread. So that's sort of weird, right? Here's the internet, which has all this lateral hyperlinking, hypertext capacity, and the tools aren't there to take advantage of that. Another dichotomy to think about is the difference between autonomous learning and independent learning. I believe, and there's no reason that this is necessarily true, but I think most of the people who become professional academics are autonomous learners. But I don't think, based on looking at years of my students, that that's the same distribution in the general population. I think there are a lot of people who are much more dependent learners in the general population than there are in the population of teachers. And those have very different implications for how you design a course, how you structure a course. There's a difference between being an entrepreneurial learner, which is what I was sort of describing when I was saying how I use the internet. You lurk, you search, your presence is very sort of minimalist, but you're gathering stuff you want. And being sort of an apprenticeship learner. You tag along with somebody who does this well and figure out how can I be like that. And it's not clear how that difference plays out in this medium. And then the question is, what I said before, the difference between our students' learning styles and our learning style, the ways in which they learn versus how we teach. How do those things interact? So those are the questions of somewhat greater length, much greater length than I had wanted to go through my end of it. And I'm really interested now, and was interested 20 minutes ago, I'm afraid, in your experiences and your questions, and whether you think I'm wrong to be worried about these questions. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely correct to be worried about it. I don't think we spend enough time thinking about what we should put on the web. I think we spend all our time thinking about what we can put on the web. And so I've been thinking a lot about this very thing for the last month, getting ready for the fall semester, and really sitting down and writing down some goals. What do I want to accomplish? What are the things that the computer accomplishes better than I do?
What have you come up with?
Well, I think what one thing that the web does better than I do is disseminate some very detailed information. Like the assignment says I want a 13-point font. In fact, I've changed my mind. I want a 12-point font. And I want to get that, if I've got class on Tuesday and Friday, somebody comes in with a really good question Tuesday afternoon, I don't want everybody else to have to wait 4 days for that information. I can put that on a discussion board. Or
right, so you want an announcement page.
Exactly. And so I can use it for that. The other thing it's really good at is a place to hold information. I hand out the assignment in class. I don't want grown people coming to me and saying, I lost my assignment. When I just told them at the beginning, here's your paper copy. If you need another one, download it from the web.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly.
So you want syllabi, you want handouts, you want all the stuff that somebody's got a drawer filled with extra copies of, and when the student loses them, they have to find the drawer. Right?
Exactly. What I do best is FaceTime, is interaction, is sitting down and reading and analyzing with them. So I want the computer to free up my time doing the things that it does best, so I can spend my time doing what I do best.
What are those back there? Actually, where were you from and what's your name?
Texas Tech University, Tracy McGaw.
Great, and your name is?
I'm Tony Weiner from the initial at St. Paul. You said you weren't clear why it was losing something of value when you can't leaf through the material on the screen. Why isn't it just the simple observation that when you're leafing through material on 5 different pages of the book at the same time, you can compare the various ideas on each page at the same time and engage in a comparative evaluation as to which of the 5 ideas on the 5 pages is most meritorious, whereas, or some subset of that kind of mental activity, whereas when you're looking at the screen, well, yes, the real experts can have 5 different pages from the same document on the screen.
It doesn't feel the same.
But the sizing irregularities, you don't know if you're getting the same words that correspond at the same time on the different subscreens. And besides, I think people read a screen one screen at a time in a way that they don't look at the particular phrase on one page versus the same or corresponding phrase on the other.
I think that's right.
It's a kind of mental activity that people can do when they can look at 5 different pages of a book at the same time that they simply don't do when they're looking at a CRT.
I think that's absolutely right. I do think it gets tricky when you have a 21-inch screen and the 5 things open, and then you visualize the table and how many books you can realistically sort of have in front of you without them piling on top of each other. And then you sort of say, well, they begin to be close analogs, but they don't feel like close analogs. And there are other components to it. There's the lack of being able to riffle, too, right? You can't browse riffle on a screen somehow. The way you can in hard copy, and so much of what I find comes that way. I mean, I don't know whether this is the right place to admit that, but the way I usually find stuff when I'm doing research is I get to the general vicinity, and then I just start going, and my eye catches keywords sort of in passing, and it's not like I've done a really precise, gotten to the right spot kind of key number search or something. So there's that too, and it's still, the magnitude of the difference feels like it's bigger than the sum of the parts. And also, there's this new way of browsing that I use for other kinds of purposes. Other thoughts? Yes?
I was struck when you said you learn by lurking, and I think a lot of students would learn in the classroom by lurking, but I'm also interested to get your opinion. If they lurk in the classroom, does that behavior change when they get on screen? Do they become more of a participant?
Have you done it?
Have you noticed that at all?
Have you done it?
No, I haven't.
What are people's thoughts? Yeah.
My experience is that especially if you're allowing people to post or ask questions anonymously, you get a different kind of question, you get a different kind of student than you get in the classroom. I don't have too much experience playing off the two against each other, or more specifically finding out whether that person who is willing to talk anonymously then gains the confidence to go into the classroom and start asking those questions. My sense is that person stays that kind of person. And I think you catch the people who otherwise fall off the radar, who are asking the questions anonymously. They'd be afraid to ask in the classroom because they know they're just not getting it. In the classroom, you tend to get the people who are kind of in the ballpark, at least, and are looking for some direction to hit the next step. The people who have no clue never say a word. But if you give them the chance to post or ask you questions specifically, anonymously, you catch those people very quickly.
And you're Mark Beckman from?
Oh, Mark Beckman from CALI.
And you are?
Virginia House from USF.
Yeah, I do feel, I think forum dialogue is something I have not been good at on the web. If it hadn't been for my 3 colleagues who were designing in tandem this year, watching their courses, I would have said, I don't think the web is good for this, but I watched them and they're great at it. So I think there are things you can do to get more interaction than the ways I've structured it. I think I've asked my students to do more than some people, than they yet have the skills for. This is a course I did entirely on the web. And what I did, there were 7 people taking it. And what I did was I gave each of those people their own forum. And said, you're moderating this forum. Make it be what you want it to be. And they hadn't a clue. I mean, they just, I put his picture up. And then, there were things there, but they were totally unmoderated, totally unshaped. People sort of talked and did things. And one of the things that happened was there was a tremendous amount of overlap across students, so that the same things would come up from the same people on many different pages. And the student whose page it was never took responsibility for it. And I felt like a total failure, and still do, around this concept, which I think is a great concept. I think the notion of giving each student their own virtual space to shape with ideas. What was it Kingsfield said? That's to do something with your ideas or your mind. Right? So I think that's a great idea, but I haven't been able to make it work yet. And it's been very hard for me to get the students who don't talk in class to talk here. Do other people have thoughts about using forums and discussion groups?
You allow them to post anonymously, though?
Yeah. 2 different ways. I give them an anonymous user so that they have a way to log on and nobody can tell who they are. And I also give them a space. The John Friezo, which is a forum that I don't have access to. So they can just talk to each other, if they believe me. Which is a sort of dubious thing to do, because of course I could get access to it if I chose. But I don't have access to it until after the grades are in. And I haven't yet, because I felt like such a loser in this course that I don't want to know what they were saying. Which is a self-policing. Right? It's a self-policing phenomenon. No, I don't have access to it. I mean, with my password, it doesn't have access to it. I'd have to create a new password, give that person the password, or give myself privilege to do it. But other people's experience with using forums and discussions? Yeah.
Well,
and you are just, who are you?
Oh, I'm Stacey Oaken from Research, and I just use an email list. And I find that there are 3 types of students. One of them are very vocal students in class who I've found typically are very vocal online as well. And then there's this group of students that doesn't feel comfortable speaking out in class, but do have something to say, and they come to the email list. And then there are the people who are completely lost, who, despite the fact that I required participation in the email list, still didn't submit anything. They'd rather lose.
Did they talk in class, those people? Did those people talk in class?
No. These are people who don't participate at all on either level. But I do think that this does provide a forum for that 1/3 who don't feel comfortable vocalizing in class, normalizing in class, but do feel more comfortable.
I think that's right. I also think that listservs and email lists are arguably better than forums because critical mass becomes an incredibly important component of this. And that for a forum to work, students have to be really checking into it several times a day. And many people are used to doing that with many students are used to doing that with their email before they get to my class. But very few of them are at a place where they will check their bookmark to the forum page 2 or 3 times a day on the different computers that they're using, the one at work, the one at home, the one at school, the different computers that they use. And so you don't get the critical mass of input that you get with email, even though the email is not threaded. So there's a vividness about email lists for the time being, as people have that familiarity that I haven't been able to generate this way yet. And I have a colleague within the university who feels strongly. He was the first person to do this stuff. He's the most actually skilled person on a technological level at building HTML, in HTML. And he still uses listservs rather than discussion forums because he feels that the conversation works better that way. So it's a thing to keep in mind. It is not absolutely the case that the Belzier and Whistlier technology is going to get you the better discussion. Any other quick thoughts? I mean, I realize we're poised in the room that's immediately outside the lunch counter. So if we all leave about now.